Faith is the bridge between divine power and your mind. It is not a vague feeling or shallow optimism. It is the spiritual connection that turns invisible potential into visible results. When a man places his full belief in the power of God, his mind becomes a conduit, a sacred channel through which infinite intelligence begins to operate. No negative thought can withstand the current of true faith. Faith is not born from comfort, but from adversity. It is in the darkest moments, when doubt shouts and fear pounds at the doors of your mind, that the whisper of faith grows louder for those who dare to listen. You must understand there is no room in the human mind for both doubt and faith to reside equally. One will always drive out the other. Doubt is a squatter. It invades when faith is absent, but faith, when it is truly activated, does not negotiate. It dominates, it commands, it clears the mental skies like thunder chasing out a storm. When you make the decision to trust in God completely, not conditionally or temporarily, but fully and finally, your mind becomes guarded by a force that does not retreat. Many speak of faith, yet few live by it. They pray with their lips but worry in their hearts. They ask for peace yet hold on to panic. That is not faith, that is mental confusion. True faith acts like the current of electricity. It must be switched on through unwavering belief, and once it flows, it energizes every fiber of your being. You begin to think differently, see differently, choose differently. You begin to speak the language of power instead of the dialect of despair. You begin to expect good things, not merely hope for them, and that expectation, rooted in God's authority, reshapes the inner terrain of your mind. Faith does not merely protect your thoughts, it transforms them. It reprograms the subconscious mind. The very place where negative thoughts once found shelter is now claimed and sanctified by new, divine programming. You start to recognize that those old patterns, those habits of fear, inferiority, bitterness, were never part of your original spiritual design. They were lies, lies accepted, absorbed, and repeated until they felt real. But when faith enters, lies begin to tremble. They cannot breathe in an environment filled with divine truth. When your mind is linked to God through faith, you gain not just protection, but direction. You are no longer stumbling in the dark. The path may not be easy, but it becomes illuminated. You start making decisions with clarity and courage. You stop reacting and start creating. You no longer operate from a place of limitation, because you no longer identify with it. Faith teaches you that you are not just flesh and blood. You are a soul with access to the power that created worlds. That is not fantasy. That is your spiritual inheritance. Understand this: negative thoughts are not your destiny. They are distractions, and faith gives you the inner strength to turn your back on them. It does not mean you will never be tempted by doubt again, but it does mean you will no longer be controlled by it. Because once faith truly awakens in a man's heart, he never looks at problems the same way again. He stops saying, "I can't," and begins to ask, with God, "How can I?" The man who walks in faith walks in quiet authority. He may be surrounded by chaos, but chaos does not enter him. He may face defeat, but defeat does not define him, because faith gives him eyes to see beyond the storm and strength to stand still until the storm passes. That kind of mind cannot be overthrown. That kind of soul cannot be poisoned by negativity. It becomes a fortress guarded by divine presence and fueled by a belief that cannot be extinguished. So if you seek to remove negative thoughts, don't start with logic. Start with faith, plant it deep, water it daily, and when doubt returns to knock, it will find the house empty of fear and full of fire. Because once faith builds its home in your mind, there is no darkness left to rent. Negative thoughts are spiritual parasites. Cast them out with divine intention. They are not native to your soul. They do not belong in the sacred space of your mind. They sneak in, often disguised as self, protection, realism, or past experience. But do not be fooled. These thoughts are not facts. They are invaders. And if you permit them to remain, even for a short time, they multiply, they root, and they poison. The moment you recognize that these thoughts are not your own, not your identity, and not your truth, you reclaim the authority to cast them out by aligning yourself with divine power. Every time you dwell in fear, you are feeding a lie. Every time you hold on to anger, You are renting space in your mind to a squatter that pays no rent and brings only destruction. Doubt, fear, envy, guilt. These are not merely psychological conditions. They are spiritual intrusions. They attach themselves to your inner life and drain your energy, distort your vision, and blur your purpose. That is why they must be treated like spiritual parasites. Not something to manage, soothe, or reason with, but something to eliminate, completely, decisively, and permanently. To do this, you must first understand the nature of divine intention. It is not passive. It is not weak. Divine intention is a force. When you call on God's power with focused, burning desire to remove these negative intruders, you set into motion a spiritual cleansing that sweeps through your mind like fire through dry grass. But this requires more than casual wishing. It requires command, not the kind of command rooted in arrogance, but the kind that is anchored in truth. You must stand in the center of your being and declare, "These thoughts are not welcome. They are not mine. They are not from God, and by divine right I reject them." You must become violent in your discipline, violent not against others, but against every idea that tries to pull you down into weakness. You must become a spiritual warrior, constantly on guard against the whispers of limitation. These whispers will come. They will disguise themselves as logic, as memory, as someone else's voice. But listen closely. If the voice within you speaks of defeat, it is not the voice of God. If the thought within you promotes fear instead of faith, it is not divine in origin. Once you see it for what it is, you must strike it down with truth. Truth is your greatest weapon, and truth does not tremble. The truth is this: you were not created to live under the rule of fear, guilt, or shame. You were not created to doubt your worth or question your destiny. You were created in the image of a divine mind, and that mind is not confused, not discouraged, and not defeated. That mind is pure intelligence, pure power, pure love. And the more you fill yourself with that divine truth, through prayer, meditation, and declaration, the less room there is for the parasites of negativity to survive. The mind must be cleansed daily, like a temple. You cannot let yesterday's thoughts remain unexamined. You cannot allow a single lie to sit comfortably in the corners of your consciousness. One negative belief left unchallenged is like a single termite in a wooden house. It will multiply and eventually collapse the whole structure. That is why your spiritual maintenance must be relentless. You don't tolerate, you eliminate. You don't entertain, you expel. This cleansing is not done in your own strength alone. When you call on God, when you invoke divine presence into your mental space, you do not fight alone. The same power that created the universe now becomes your ally in cleaning your mind of every foul, fearful, and false idea that ever tried to define you. But you must ask with certainty. You must believe that what you ask for is already being done. Because intention backed by belief becomes a command in the spiritual realm, and when you command from that space, negativity flees. It cannot survive the light, so take responsibility for your thoughts. Not all of them are yours, but all of them are your responsibility. You may not have chosen their arrival, but you can choose their departure, and the moment you decide, with clarity, conviction, and divine authority, that they no longer belong, you become free. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Because you remembered who you are, a vessel of light, not a container of darkness. And once light reclaims its place, darkness has no choice but to leave. Prayer is not pleading, it's commanding your spirit to align with divine truth. Most people misunderstand the power of prayer because they approach it with the mindset of lack and desperation. They kneel before the Creator begging for relief, asking for signs, or hoping that their cries will be heard. But true prayer is not born out of weakness. It is born out of strength. It is not an act of begging. It is an act of claiming. When you truly understand the nature of prayer, you realize it is not a one-way plea to the heavens, but a powerful alignment between your spirit and the infinite intelligence that governs all things. The moment you speak in prayer with unwavering belief, you are not merely talking to God. You are commanding your inner world to rise and submit to divine order. You are instructing your thoughts to fall in line with eternal truth. You are activating the divine potential already placed within you. That is the sacred power of prayer. It shifts your identity from a victim of circumstance to a co-creator with divine will. When you pray with conviction, you speak as one who knows, not as one who doubts. You affirm what already exists in spirit, and by doing so, you summon it into your reality. To pray effectively, your words must be wrapped in belief. There can be no double-mindedness. You cannot say, "I trust," with your lips while trembling with fear in your heart. That is not prayer. That is contradiction. Real prayer is clean, focused, bold. It does not beg God to intervene. It declares that God is already at work. It does not plead for change. It announces that change is already unfolding. You are not trying to convince God to act. You are convincing your own mind to wake up to what God has already made available. When you pray from this space of spiritual authority, your thoughts begin to shift instantly. The mind, like a loyal servant, obeys the tone of the master. And when the master speaks from faith, the mental atmosphere responds with peace, clarity, and strength. Negative thoughts begin to lose their grip, not because they were argued with, but because they were overruled. You didn't try to fight darkness. You simply turned on the light. That is what true prayer does. It fills the inner space with divine light, and in that light, all fear, doubt, worry, and negativity dissolve on their own. Think of prayer as tuning your mind to a higher frequency. When you pray with intention and trust, you are no longer operating from the limited viewpoint of man. You are receiving insight from the unlimited mind of God. In that space, problems shrink, confusion fades, direction becomes clear, and what once seemed impossible now seems inevitable. This is why prayer is not an emotional release. It is a spiritual recalibration. You're not praying to escape reality. You're praying to master it. And here's a truth few understand. You don't pray once and then wait. You pray continually, not in repetition of words, but in consistency of alignment. Prayer is not just something you do in the morning or at night. It is the vibration you carry through the entire day. It is the silent declaration in your mind that says, "I know who walks with me. I know who fights for me. I know what lives in me." With that understanding, even your silence becomes prayer. Even your thoughts become holy ground. The most powerful prayers are not the ones shouted from desperation. They are the ones whispered in unwavering faith. "Thank you" becomes more powerful than "help me," because it speaks from the belief that what you need has already been provided. When you shift from praying out of panic to praying out of power, you begin to see results that no effort of the flesh could ever achieve. You move from waiting for miracles to walking in them, so take control of your spiritual language. Speak to your soul like a commander speaks to his army. Declare healing, declare freedom, declare peace. Not because your circumstances say so, but because your spirit knows so. When your prayer becomes a declaration, your mind aligns with your destiny. And that alignment is what removes every negative thought, every false belief, every limiting idea that ever tried to occupy the sacred space of your mind. Prayer is your weapon, not because it changes God, but because it changes you. It reminds you that you were never alone, that you were never powerless, that the same force that created mountains and oceans now listens when you speak, not with fear, but with faith. And in that faith, your words carry the weight of heaven. They become law to your subconscious, and once the mind accepts divine law, there is no room left for doubt to hide. Your thoughts become a battlefield, but the victory belongs to the disciplined and spiritually armed. Every day, from the moment you open your eyes, your mind is under siege. Thoughts begin to pour in. Some are your own, born from purpose and truth, but many are not. They are shaped by old fears, external influences, past traumas, societal programming, and subtle lies whispered by a world that thrives on distraction. These thoughts come uninvited, seeking to occupy your mental space, dominate your emotional state, and ultimately sabotage your actions. The battle is real, and it happens silently within the walls of your mind. But here is the great truth. You are not powerless in this battle. You are not a helpless observer of your own thinking. You are the commander. You are the one who decides what stays and what goes. However, you must be spiritually armed. You cannot win this battle with weak intention or casual desire. You cannot overcome negative thoughts by simply hoping for peace. You must train your mind like a warrior trains for combat, with daily discipline, unwavering focus, and a commitment to truth that surpasses comfort. Discipline is not punishment. It is the path to mental freedom. It is the daily act of choosing what thoughts you will allow to live within you. The undisciplined mind will accept anything. It will absorb fear, soak in doubt, entertain anger, and replay failure like a broken record. But the disciplined mind stops the intruder at the gate. It does not wait for negativity to take root. It questions every thought. Is this lifting me or lowering me? Is this voice of God or fear? Is this thought feeding my faith or starving my potential? In this way, your thoughts must earn their place in your mind. They must serve your vision or be cast out. Spiritual armor is not just a poetic metaphor. It is a real necessity in a world that constantly seeks to shape you from the outside in. Your armor is made of faith, truth, gratitude, forgiveness, and vision. Faith protects your mind from fear. Truth shields you from deception. Gratitude disarms anxiety. Forgiveness frees you from bitterness. And vision keeps your eyes fixed on where you are going, not where you've been. When you clothe your inner world in this armor, you walk into the battlefield of the mind already victorious. Because you no longer fight for freedom, you fight from it. The disciplined and spiritually armed person does not run from negative thoughts. They face them, they expose them, they challenge them with higher truth. When fear says, "You can't," faith replies, "With God I already have." When guilt says, "You're not worthy," divine truth responds, "I am redeemed, chosen, and enough." Every negative thought must be confronted, because what you do not confront, you allow to control you, and what controls you will shape your reality. This is why many people remain stuck, not because they lack talent or opportunity, but because they have surrendered the battle of the mind. They have allowed old thoughts to build new prisons. They let one failure write a lifelong story of defeat. But you are not called to live in mental bondage. You are called to reign, to rise, to renew your mind daily and reject anything that does not align with the highest version of yourself. This requires constant work. It requires silence when the world is loud. It requires self-reflection when others choose distraction. It requires courage to unlearn the lies that shaped you and replace them with divine truth that frees you. Victory in the mind is not a single event. It is a way of life. It is the moment-by-moment choice to protect your thoughts, feed your spirit, and reject the poison that once felt familiar. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. Being aware of your thoughts and willing to challenge them before they challenge you. You can either let your thoughts rule you, or you can rule them. You can either let fear write your future, or you can let faith rewrite your story. The battlefield is not out there in the world. It is not in your circumstances. It is within, and the one who wins that battle within becomes unstoppable on the outside. The disciplined mind is the birthplace of peace. The spiritually armed soul becomes a fortress of strength, and once you master your inner world, no outer storm can shake you. You become the victor, not the victim, the leader, not the follower, the creator, not the captive. This is the power that belongs to you. And it begins by choosing, today and every day, to fight the battle of the mind with divine weapons and unbreakable discipline. Gratitude is the gateway that closes the door on negativity and opens your soul to divine clarity. It is not a fleeting feeling or polite response to good fortune. Gratitude is a state of spiritual maturity, a deliberate decision to shift your focus from what is missing to what is present, from what is broken to what is blessed, from what you fear to what you believe. It is the single most powerful mental reprogramming tool given by the Creator, because it turns every moment, no matter how dark, into a doorway for light to enter. A mind rooted in gratitude cannot be ruled by negative thoughts. Why? Because the very nature of gratitude demands attention to abundance. It is the daily reminder that, regardless of what you face, there is still something sacred in your life right now. And the more you acknowledge it, the more you attract peace, strength, and spiritual insight. Where negativity breeds in silence and complaint, gratitude breathes life into the soul. It raises your spiritual vibration, calms emotional storms, and invites divine presence to dwell within your thoughts. Most people think gratitude is a response to success, that when they finally achieve, then they will feel thankful, but they have it backwards. Gratitude is not the result of success, it is the cause. When you choose to be grateful even when circumstances are against you, You activate a force within you that transcends logic and natural limitations. You shift the frequency of your mind and attract wisdom, solutions, and miracles that were invisible to the complaining heart. The man who wakes up and says, "Thank you," even when he's in the fire, is the man who will walk through it and come out refined, not ruined. Gratitude disciplines your thoughts. It forces you to see through a higher lens. It says, yes, this pain is real, but so is the lesson. It says, this door may have closed, but another is already opening. It teaches you to focus not on what you lost, but on what you still have, and more importantly, who you're becoming through it all. That shift alone can end the reign of negative thoughts in an instant, because now, instead of feeding sorrow, you are feeding perspective, and perspective is power. Think of the mind as a garden. Negative thoughts are the weeds. They grow wild, fast, and without invitation. But gratitude is the gardener. Every time you express thankfulness, you are pulling out a weed and planting something beautiful in its place. The more you do it, the more your mind becomes a sanctuary instead of a battlefield. But just like any garden, it must be tended daily. You don't practice gratitude once and expect lasting peace. You practice it constantly, through every season, every trial, every triumph. Even when it feels unnatural, gratitude must be spoken. Not just thought, but declared. Speak it aloud. Say, thank you for this day. Thank you for the breath in my lungs. Thank you for the strength I don't yet see but know is coming. Your words shape your mind. And when your words are rooted in gratitude, your mind begins to reject the lies of fear and lack. You teach your subconscious to look for blessings instead of burdens, to seek opportunity instead of obstacles, to expect goodness instead of doom. Gratitude is also the great stabilizer of emotion. Negative thoughts often begin with emotional triggers, disappointment, comparison, regret, but gratitude interrupts that cycle. It tells your emotions, you may feel this, but you don't rule this. And in that moment, your spirit takes the lead. You stop reacting from pain and start responding from power. And once your spirit is in charge, negativity no longer has dominion. It is impossible to be grateful and bitter at the same time. One will always drive out the other. The question is, which one will you feed? Gratitude is not based on how much you have. It's based on how deeply you see. A person with eyes trained to notice the good is far wealthier than someone surrounded by riches but blinded by complaint. This is why some of the most powerful people walk humbly, while some of the most miserable people live in castles. Gratitude has nothing to do with your possessions. It has everything to do with your perception. If you want to remove negative thoughts, start with the simplest yet most powerful practice. Give thanks, not after the storm, but during it. Not when you understand, but even when you don't. Not because everything is right, but because you choose to see what is still good. That one act, repeated daily, will transform your mental landscape more than any strategy, technique, or affirmation. Because gratitude is not just a feeling, it is divine alignment. And once you are aligned with the mind of God, there is no room left for darkness to dwell. When you surrender your mind to a higher power, peace replaces panic and faith overcomes fear. This is not a passive act, nor is it an escape from responsibility. Surrender is not weakness. It is spiritual strength in its purest form. It is the conscious decision to stop carrying burdens you were never meant to bear alone. It is the act of saying, I no longer need to control every outcome because I trust in a power greater than me. And that moment, when the mind releases its desperate grip, is the moment when true transformation begins. Fear thrives in a mind that believes it is the only force at work. Panic takes root in the soil of self-reliance. But when you begin to understand that there is divine intelligence guiding your path, that there is a plan operating beyond what your eyes can see, the chaos within starts to dissolve. You no longer feel the need to solve every problem in your own strength. You no longer feel the urge to predict, control, and stress over every detail. Instead, you step into the power of faith, not blind faith, but intelligent, conscious trust that the same power that created you is also leading you. Surrender is not giving up, it's giving over. It's handing your worries to the one who already has the solution. It's releasing your grip on the things you cannot change and embracing the truth that divine timing is wiser than human pressure. When the mind surrenders, it becomes still, and in stillness the voice of God becomes clear. Solutions begin to appear, strength begins to rise, clarity begins to unfold, not because you fought harder, but because you finally became quiet enough to receive. The most powerful minds are not the ones filled with facts. They are the ones filled with faith. They are not consumed with endless calculation, but centered in unshakable trust. They understand that no matter how strong or intelligent they are, there is a limit to human ability. But there is no limit to divine intervention. When the mind releases its addiction to control and turns upward in surrender, it creates space for miracles. It invites answers that logic alone could never produce. And more importantly, it finds peace, not because the storm stopped, but because the mind no longer fears it. Too often, people live in a constant state of mental warfare, fighting thoughts of doubt, battling anxieties, questioning every step. And they exhaust themselves trying to win a war they were never meant to fight alone. But the moment you surrender, you tap into a force that has never lost a battle. You shift from resistance to receptivity. You no longer resist what is happening. You trust that what is happening is part of your elevation, and with that shift, fear loses its grip. Anxiety loses its voice. The mind stops running and begins to rest. But surrender must be intentional. It does not happen by accident. It is a decision you make daily, sometimes moment by moment. When fear rises, you respond, "I surrender this thought." When doubt creeps in, you say, "I trust the process." When panic knocks, you open the door with peace, knowing that your mind is not a battlefield anymore. It is a sanctuary now, governed by higher wisdom, not lower emotion. True surrender is the gateway to wisdom. Once the mind is quiet, God speaks. Once the fear is released, guidance flows, and the more you practice surrender, the more you notice that your steps are ordered, that closed doors were protection, that delays were preparation, that what seemed like loss was the foundation for future gain. This clarity doesn't come through overthinking. It comes through letting go. Surrender is not the absence of effort. It is the alignment of effort with divine will. It means you still work, still strive, still plan, but not from panic, from peace. You still pursue your goals, but now your heart is not filled with torment. It is filled with trust. You walk with confidence, not because the path is certain, but because the guide is. When the mind is surrendered, the soul can soar. No longer tied down by the weight of worry, you rise into clarity, confidence, and calm. You become unshakable, not because life gets easier, but because your spirit gets stronger. And every time fear tries to return, you meet it with the quiet power of surrender. You remind it that you are not alone. You remind it that peace is your portion, not panic. You remind it that your faith is not fragile. It is forged in fire and grounded in trust. You don't lose control. You gain freedom. You don't lose your mind. You reclaim it. And once your mind is aligned with divine power, fear becomes irrelevant. Because when faith stands tall, fear cannot stand at all.